What made your last keeper leave?
Him, me second.
Mm-hmm.
Died. Went mad, he did. Raving about sirens, merfolk, bad omens, and the like. In the end, weren't no more sense left in him than an hen's tooth. He believed that there was some enchantment in the light. He notioned that St. Elmo had cast his very fire into it. Salvation, said he.
With 2019's The Lighthouse, Robert Eggers realizes the promise demonstrated in his first film, The Witch. Maturing as a director, Eggers has riddled his film with imaginative and striking visuals and offers a much more complex story for our consideration. His attention to the environment in which his characters dwell is much more in evidence and plays a significant role. The booming wails of the foghorn feel like building oppression, and the pathetic fallacy of this relentless storm dominating the second half in resonance with Thomas Howard's tormented soul. What makes The Lighthouse difficult viewing is the fact that it's seemingly presented from the perspective of an unreliable narrator. To complicate things, it isn't clear if this is a third-person or a first-person perspective. What I mean by this is that the story as displayed may be taken to represent events as perceived by the Robert Pattinson character, Thomas Howard. Or it may be read as objective on the whole, while including sequences presenting dreams and visions that Howard is experiencing. It may be a presentation of things as perceived by another party altogether. In Eggers' prior film, The Witch, any speculation that the misfortunes of the family may be the product of paranoia and not an actual being is quickly put to rest. A few minutes into the film, we are shown the witch and know that she exists. By contrast, in The Lighthouse, Willem Dafoe's Thomas Wake directly alludes to the possibility of his own non-existence. We're invited to consider the experience a subjective one, while being chided for wanting to pretend it is so. This ambiguity makes for frustrating viewing, and can put the audience off, but I think it also represents the strength of the film. It invites viewers to re-examine its contents, in search of both understanding and confirmation that what occurred was in fact as they perceived it, like a witness to some otherworldly vision returning to the scene in hopes of recurrence and illumination.
What?
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 What? What? That's what I mean! That's the trouble with you. That's the trouble with ye. With you! With ye! No! No!
But whether taken as a literal presentation of events that carry only metaphorical significance, or as a representation of abstracted ideas and feelings of its protagonist, the film is the film. I concede that I am at a disadvantage, not being studied in the lore and mythos of the sea, of mermaids, sirens, or Selkie, nor of Triton below. Having said that, my approach to this review is based on the assumption that the depicted events are meant to be both literal and figurative in nature. In other words, the characters and events may very well represent metaphor or myth, but they also have their own literal existence. Both men actually exist, are actually present on the island, manning the lighthouse, etc.
Good boy. Good boy.
Now you get in there, where you belong.
Events actually occur as shown, with the exception of dream sequences and visions which I take to be accurate representations of the character's perceptions. The thematic content of the film is what it is, regardless.
You're just trying to scare me.
Look at ye, pretending. But ye well know you're not.
So what is the story? Pattinson is introduced as Ephraim Winslow, the junior of 2 officers posted to a remote lighthouse. He excuses his presence by explaining the more remote postings offer better pay. He formerly worked in logging in Canada, but left after he witnessed the accidental death of a despised colleague.
Thank you, lad.
Winslow. Ephraim Winslow. This last 2 weeks, sir, I'd like it if you'd call me by my name.
What's the terrible part of a sailor's life? Ask you, lad. 'Tis when the work stops, when you're twixt wind and water. Doldrums, doldrums, eviler than the devil. Boredom makes men to villains, and the water goes quick, lad. Vanished. The only medicine is drink. Keeps them sailors happy, keeps them agreeable, keeps them calm, keeps them stupid.
Willem Dafoe's Thomas Wake, meanwhile, is both attentive and solicitous. Himself the weaver of elaborate tall tales, he dismisses the young man's story as uninteresting. He also implies that it is disingenuous, as though to encourage the young man to speak more freely.
So, what wrong such a one as ye to this damned rock?
We'll later learn that Pattinson's real name is Thomas Howard, and that Winston was a man whose death during a logging drive was at least encouraged, if not caused, by Howard.
I lied. I'll be scuppered.
Thomas. Tommy.
Winslow.
Tom Howard.
What's Winslow?
It's nothing.
Nothing.
Can I trust you?
Don't be spilling any of your beans to me.
You feel shame when you lie with a woman?
He is a man driven by guilt and shame. It's his highest aspiration to find solace and forgiveness for the murder which he may or may not have actually enacted, but for which he certainly blames himself. His dreams or recollections of Winston are colored by violence and associated implied sexual repression. We begin to suspect his reasons for killing Winston had less to do with the man's incompetence or offensive personality, and more to do with Howard's resentment of the feelings Winston evokes within himself. Ever atoning, the film is full of Howard's repeated, difficult, and fruitless ascents. Like Sisyphus, he appears condemned to climb, ever hopeful of redemption, ever burdened, and never relieved. He is also repeatedly tormented by a one-eyed gull.
I seen you sparring with a gull. Best leave him be. Bad luck to kill a seabird.
More tall tales.
Bad luck to kill a seabird.
Admonished by Wake for conflicting with it, he's told that seabirds are vessels for the souls of lost seamen. As such, the one-eyed gull represents Abe, Wake's former second, who is driven mad by convictions of the island's magical nature and the light that represents salvation. This is another of the patterns Howard is doomed to repeat. We'll later discover that Abe may himself have been a victim of Wake's. Parallels multiply, as Howard kills the seabird that represents the man who preceded him.
To 4 weeks.
No, sir, thank you.
Bad luck to leave a toast unfinished, lad.
Howard has come to the island deliberately, to place himself in a situation where the rules are simple, and he aims to abide by them.
Tainted, I understood it's against regulations, sir.
Did you?
I did, sir, from them's manual.
Didn't picture you a reading man.
Yet it is his nature to be a rule breaker, as we will see by his embracing the booze that keeps men stupid. He chafes under the yoke and alludes to his resentment of Wake's authority being a reflection of his experience under the authority of the real Winston, whose fate foreshadows Wake's. Once again, a pattern is duplicated, as Howard is brought into conflict with an irascible superior. One gets the impression this pattern is a familiar one for Howard.
Damn it, go away. I don't know your name.
Wake?
The name of Thomas Wake, of course, is a double entendre, with Wake simultaneously referencing a state of awareness and the aftermath of one's nautical passing. If one were to read the Lighthouse as pure metaphor, representing only aspects of one persona, Wake weirdly seems to fulfill the roles of both id and superego to Howard's ego.
Well, to my friend Tom, I'm getting off this goddamn rock.
Wake can be understood as a representation of conscience, or as a kind of supernatural gatekeeper and judge, a briny St. Peter on guard at the pearly gates.
You don't go in there. Ain't no crime to take a snort now. A clear night and our last afore relief. I ain't never known an inspector what won't turn a blind eye. And I won't take no for an answer.
He's that impish perversity that tests and provokes, that thing within that makes a killer invite discovery and capture, whether for amusement or some unconscious desire for punishment.
Dance, Winslow! Dance!
Now I got it all figured out. Except what's the secret mischief you're keeping? Up there!
Jesus, Mary and Joseph, Tommy.
We can also take him at face value, a slightly mad, compulsive liar who keeps the light to himself.
I'm the keeper of this station, lad. Some other station you can tend the light.
Manual says...
My log is the only book on this rock.
Says
Tis
I'm
gospel.
the wiki, but
I'm the
I ain't
keeper
feel
of the
one
light,
way
lad. And
I
I'll
ain't
never
the
let no man
book
touch it.
said-
Don't
I ain't the
concern
book said
yourself
we
with
all
the
can
beacon,
eat.
lad. Mine!
It's not a stretch to see the light atop the house as an elevated state of enlightenment and beauty, a heavenly forbidden place that is the sole province of Thomas Wake. Wake is the jealous guardian and keeper of the light, and as such, the judge of Howard's worthiness for atonement, as well as his superior in legal authority. And so Wake becomes the obstacle Howard must overcome, so that he may access the cleansing light of absolution.
Just let me in the light, old man. I've learned so much from you. Just let me show you another chance. Forgive and forget, I says.
Since we're getting too friendly, Ephraim Winslow, tell me, what's a timberman want with being a wiki?
Whether real or imagined, Wake acts as a sort of confessor for the sins of Thomas Howard, always eliciting his story, yet complaining that it is tedious. He'll ask him what really brought him to the island, then scold him for spilling the beans.
Same old boring story, eh?
Well, you asked.
Between Wake's lies and his own delusions, Howard becomes increasingly confused. Thomas Wake mocks the younger man's state of mind, suggesting that perhaps Thomas Howard is actually deliriously wandering in the snows of a Canadian winter, imagining himself on the island, and that Wake exists at all.
Help me to recollect. Who are you again, Tommy? I'm probably a figment of your imagination. This rock is a figment of your imagination, too. You're probably wandering through a grove of tag alders up north in Canada, like a frost-bitten maniac talking to yourself.
At this point, there's a comparison to be made to Bergman's Persona, as the suggestion occurs that the two men actually may be one and the same. They are, or are becoming, one. Perhaps there is only the man and his own accusing conscience, or spiritual judge. However, as with Persona, I find that while the idea is worth exploring, I again do not infer that there are not, in fact, two distinct characters here. The suggestion of the two men forming a combined identity is complicated by the fact that Howard has taken the name of his victim, Winslow, thus also identifying with him, and with the gull, which represents Abe, the last keeper who underwent a similar process of conscience and madness. It's as though each is part of a fractured whole, or individual representations of the commonality between all men. It makes little difference which.
You ain't even human no more. Working apart from folks so long. You're only tolerable when you're drunk.
Get to work, says I.
When he kills the one-eyed gull, he symbolically reenacts both the murder of Ephraim Winslow and the death of Abe, his predecessor. As such, it's also readable as a triple act of self-destruction, in that Howard identifies as Winslow, as Abe, and has been told it is ill luck to harm a seabird. Confronted by guilt and fear, he lashes out in violence, and it's at this point that the weather turns to his disadvantage, and he becomes trapped on the island indefinitely.
And I had him handy and helpless, alone, and too far downstream. And I wanted to do him in. I admit I did.
When Howard finally tells a version of his story that presumably approximates the truth, Wake vanishes, an echo of his voice admonishing Howard for spilling the beans.
It was... I didn't. I didn't. I did not. The day was long as hell on that drive, and I was lead tired, I admit it. But I saw him slipping, not me. We saw the jam coming, and I stood, and he slipped. He shouted up, and I just stood there.
Why'd you spill your beans, Tommy?
In Howard's subsequent vision of discovering himself as his own murder victim, Wake becomes a godlike figure, a light that sees through Howard and judges him, beaming from his eyes.
Don't leave me!
Part of what keeps Howard off balance is the constant lies and misrepresentations of Wake, or so it appears. Given the unreliability of our narrator, we can't be certain that things aren't occurring exactly in accord with Wake's claims, and that we're being shown otherwise as a consequence of adopting a delirious point of view.
And I knew you was mad when you smashed up that lifeboat just now and chasing me with an axe, trying to kill old Tom. You lie, Thomas.
Stop it!
You lied to yourself, but you ain't had the sauce to see it.
But whether the madness is Howard's alone or shared by both men, Wake does judge.
Aye, sir.
You're too slow. You a dullard?
No, sir.
Fooled me.
He assesses Howard's guilty story as tedious and harangues him for his sense of entitlement.
You make me laugh with your false grum. Ye pretended there's some mystery in your quietudes, but there ain't no mystery. You're an open book. A picture, says I. A painted actress screaming in the footlights. A bitch what wants to be coveted for nothing but being born, crying about the silver spoon what should have been yours.
When he attacks Wake, in Howard's confusion he perceives him both as Winston and as Triton, and again the violence is accompanied by sexual imagery, with the mermaid briefly appearing in place of his victim. After ostensibly killing Wake, Howard has the cigarette he spoke of wanting upon the death of Winslow. Again, we're invited to see either a repetition of events or an abstracted representation of those events replayed in the mind of the protagonist. In killing Wake, Howard duplicates the murder of Abe, which in a sense is a murder of himself. Howard kills Winston, Wake kills Abe, Howard kills Abe embodied in the skull, Howard kills Wake. And so the cycle goes. In many ways, it's as though the soul of Howard is in purgatory, repeating the sins of his doom, unable to escape inevitable damnation. In this, it resembles the witch, which also suggests that the sins of man are irredeemable. By murdering Wake, Howard realizes his own worst fears, his self-doubt ultimately justified. It's by killing his own conscience in the form of Thomas Wake and seeking absolution in the light that Thomas Howard is finally destroyed, and the curse of Wake fulfilled. The Lighthouse does not grant absolution to the guilty. Howard finds no forgiveness there, but is confronted with the truth of his own nature. He is rejected, cast aside, and ultimately suffers the fate he was condemned to by Wake's curse. In The Witch, a man may be doomed despite innocence, and may be corrupted despite every good intention, whereas in The Lighthouse, an equally indifferent God is at least just. The guilty are punished for their badness. In The Witch, young Thomasin was condemned by original sin and the faults of her father, combined with the malicious intervention of a witch. Here, Thomas Howard, while driven by seabirds and sirens, appears to have every opportunity to change his approach, and maybe to save his soul. He just doesn't.
Will you kill me? Will you? Will you kill me like you done that gull?
I did!
Liar! You murdering dog! 'Twas ye what changed the wind on us. 'Twas ye what damned us, dog. 'Twas ye. Will you do what you wished you'd done to old Winslow? Will you best me then? For Winslow were right. Thomas, you're a dog. A filthy dog!
But at a certain point, it appears that in the worldview of Robert Eggers, there's little to choose between doesn't and can't, and the doom of his protagonist is a foregone conclusion. As always, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, leave any comments you may have, and check out the other videos on our channel.
Ephraim Winslow, well, now he'd got a spiffy clean slate, and Thomas Howard, well, he don't. No prospects. How else am I gonna find respectable work?